Good evening and welcome to the Sons of the Pact. This is Kabed-Yahuw, and today I would like to talk about the covenant of God. And many people use the terms Old Testament and New Testament. They don't always know why or how these terms came to be used. Many people at least realize that a testament is a covenant, and so they connect them to the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. In the terms Old Testament and New Testament, those terms were actually coined by a man named Marcion, who was trying to create an entirely different theology from the scriptures. And that's actually a topic for another time, but what I want to focus on is this Old Covenant versus the New Covenant concept. Most people assume that they know the differences between these covenants, but then I hear lots of explanations that are not scriptural, or a lot of it actually relates to or is based on the law of Moses, which is in itself a misnomer. In fact, the covenants that God has established, or the pacts that he has cut out with mankind throughout scriptures, were not based upon a law, but rather they were based upon promises. So a lot of people say that the old covenant has passed away, and if that's true, then that means that the promises that were associated with it have also passed away, and that's not exactly scriptural, so we'll take a look at that. But one of the first questions that comes up is, what is the old covenant? And that would be which pact, which covenant? God actually has cut out several covenants. He's established several different pacts throughout the scriptures. So which one is the old one, or are they all the old one? And I certainly hope not, because the first covenant that God established was with Noah, in which he promised never to flood the earth again forever. So if that covenant has been done away with, then God can now flood the land whenever he wants. And God spoke unto Noah and unto his sons with him for speaking. And I, behold me, I am raising my pact with you and with your seed after you, and with every living soul that is with you, in the flyer, in the beast, and in every animal of the land with you, from all the emerged of the box, from every animal of the land. And I will establish my pact with you, and all flesh will not be cut out furthermore from the waters of the flood, and it will not exist evermore a flood for ruining the land. Note, that pact still stands today. So what was the next pact that God cut out after the one that he cut out with Noah? In the such day Jehovah cut out a pact with Avram, for speaking, for your seed I bestowed this land, from the river of Mitzrayim unto the great river, the river of Parat, of the Canaan, of the Kenezine, of the Kadmonim, of the Cheti, and the Perizi, and the Rephaim, and the Amori, and the Canaani, and the Girgashi, and the Yabusi. Alright, so this was the next pact that God cut out. This is the second covenant that we encounter in the scriptures, and that covenant is stating that God is going to give the land of the descendants of Ham to Abraham and to his seed. And God actually does reiterate this covenant later on. He gives us a little bit more details. And Avram existed, a son of 90 of an year and 9 years, and Jehovah appeared unto Avram, and he spoke unto him, I am El Shaddai, walk before my face and exist unblemished. I will bestow my pact between me and between you, and I will cause you to be abundant in excess of excess. And Avram fell over upon his face, and God declared to him for speaking, I am, behold, my pact is with you, and you will exist for the father of a multitude of nations, and your name will not be proclaimed furthermore Avram. Accordingly, your name will exist Avraham. As a father of a multitude of nations, I will bestow you. I will cause you to be fruitful in excess of excess. I will bestow you for nations, and kings will emerge from you. And I will establish my pact between me and between you, and between your seed after you for their generations, for a pact to antiquity, for existing for God before you and before your seed after you. And I will bestow for you and for your seed after you a land of your residences, or the land of Canaan, for an holding to antiquity. And I will exist for God before them. So God established his pact with Abraham and to his seed, to antiquity, forever, to end of days. He will never forget it. And Abraham is and will be a father of a multitude of nations. His seed will be given the land of Canaan, and God will exist before them for God. They will be his people. And that is all still true today. Those are all still promises of God. And we see how he continues his pact. And Abraham spoke unto God, Alas, Ishmael, will he live before your face? And God spoke, But Sarah, your wife, will birth a son for you, and you will proclaim his name Yitzchak, and I will establish my pact with him for a pact to antiquity, for his seed after him. And for Ishmael I responded to you, Behold, I have blessed him, and I will cause him to be fruitful, and I will cause him to abound in excess of excess. He will birth 12 chieftains, and I have bestowed him for a great nation. And my pact I will establish with Yitzchak, that which Sarah will birth for you, for this appointed time in the year after. So the same pact continued on and was passed to Yitzchak, but not with Ishmael. And then we see later on that it was passed on to Yaakov. We all know the story of Yaakov and Esau, his brother, and how Esau forsook his birthright and sold it to Yaakov. So the promise does pass on to Yaakov, whom God later gave the name Yisrael. So that's how we see that the pact is established with Israel, the grandson of Abraham. Now, this is still just the second pact that God has made. And we see that it's with Yaakov, and Yaakov's son Yosef. He is enslaved in Egypt, and then we know about his rise to power beside Pharaoh. He brings his family to Egypt, Mitzrayim, and Yosef dies, the Pharaoh dies, and the Egyptian dynasty is renewed with a new king. And that's when the story continues regarding the covenant of God. And it existed in those abundant days, and the king of Mitzrayim died. And the sons of Israel sighed from the servitude, and they entreated, and their solicitation ascended unto God from the servitude. And God responded to their groaning, and God remembered his pact with Abraham, with Yitzchak, and with Yaakov. And God saw the sons of Israel, and God acknowledged. Now, why are these three always specified? We have Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So there are a couple of reasons. One of them is to specify which Yaakov. We have Yaakov, the son of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. So we are given specificity because of the genealogy. The other reason is so we have a very clear line of which son is inheriting the pact, the covenant that God set up with his friend Abraham. So from Abraham it passes to Yitzchak, not to Ishmael, and from Yitzchak it passes to Yaakov, not to Esau, his brother. So Yaakov comes down to Egypt, and his name is now Yisrael, and they're enslaved. So God summons Moshe to come to save the people in response to God remembering his covenant with Abraham. It's still the same covenant at this point. Okay, so we're on the second covenant. The first was with Noah. Now we're on the covenant with Abraham, and we see God calling out to Moshe. And God declared unto Moshe, and he spoke unto him, I am Jehovah, and I appeared unto Abraham, unto Yitzchak, and unto Yaakov by El Shaddai. And of my name Jehovah was I not known for them? And also I established my pact with them, for bestowing the land of Canaan for them, the land of their residencies, that which they had resided in it. And also myself I have responded to the groaning of the sons of Israel, that which Mitzrayim is causing them to serve, and I have remembered my pact. For thus speak before the sons of Israel, I am Jehovah, and I will cause you to emerge from under the workloads of Mitzrayim, and I will reappropriate you from their servitude, and I will redeem you by an extended arm and by great judgments. And I will take you for a people for myself, and I will exist for God before you, and you will know as I am Jehovah your God, causing you to emerge from under the workloads of Mitzrayim. And I will bring you unto the land, that which I have borne my hand for bestowing it, for Abraham, for Yitzchak, and for Yaakov, and I will bestow it for you to be a succession. I am Yehovah. So the entire Exodus is based upon the fact that God had a covenant with Abraham. And so he brought the entirety of the people of Israel out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim. And we see later on where God now continues his pact, not with one son of Yaakov, but with all the sons of Yaakov, with all the seed of Israel, to be his people, for him to be God before them. And it's the same pact with God's dear friend Abraham, and God has to honor it. So we see a little bit more about that. In the 3rd month of the emergence of the sons of Israel from the land of Mitzrayim, on this day they came to the desert of Sinai, and they traveled from Rephidim, and they came to the desert of Sinai, and they camped in the desert. And Israel camped there opposite the mountain. And Moshe ascended unto God, and Yehovah proclaimed unto him from the mountain for speaking. So will you speak for the house of Yaakov, and you will divulge for the sons of Israel. You have seen that which I performed before Mitzrayim, and I have borne you over upon wings of kites, and I brought you unto me. And now, if responding, you will respond by my voice, and you will guard my pact. Accordingly, you will exist for me to be a possession from all the peoples, as all the land is for me. And you will exist for me to be a kingdom of priests and a sanctified nation. These are the declarations that you will declare unto the sons of Israel. And Moshe came and he proclaimed for the elders of the people, and he placed before their faces all these declarations that Yehovah had commanded him. And they answered, all the people together, and they spoke, all that Yehovah has declared we will perform. And Moshe returned the declarations of the people unto Yehovah, and Yehovah spoke unto Moshe, behold, I come unto you in the thickness of the cloud. By reason the people will respond by my declaration beside you, and also they will trust in you for antiquity. And Moshe divulged the declarations of the people unto Yehovah. And Yehovah spoke unto Moshe, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and they will wash their vestures. And let them exist to be primed for the 3rd day, as on the 3rd day Yehovah will descend before the eyes of all the people over at the mountain of Sinai. So he's doing it. He's bringing them out of Egypt to the land where they will reside, that he promised to Abraham, and he's going to be God before them. He's going to come down to the mountain so that they can envision him as God, and so that they will forever trust that Moshe is his servant. It's absolutely incredible. It's exactly everything that he promised. That was his covenant. And bear in mind that this is all before delivering the 10 declarations of the 10 commandments engraved on stone. So the 2 stone tablets were not given to them yet. That's actually happening next after this point. And Moshe came and he recorded for the people all the declarations of Yehovah and all the judgments. And the people answered of one voice, and they spoke, all the declarations that Yehovah has declared we will perform. And Moshe wrote all the declarations of Yehovah, and he roused in the morning, and he built a sacrificial altar at the base of the mountain, and 12 of a pillar for the 12 scions of Israel. And he sent the youths of the sons of Israel, and they caused ascension offerings to ascend, and they sacrificed sacrifices of conciliation offerings for Yehovah of bulls. And Moshe took half of the blood, and he placed into basins, and half of the blood he flung over the sacrificial altar. And he took the record book of the pact, and he proclaimed in the ears of the people, and they spoke, all that Yehovah has declared we will perform, and we will respond. And Moshe took the blood, and he flung over the people, and he spoke, behold, the blood of the pact that Yehovah has cut out beside you over all these declarations. And Moshe ascended, and Aharon, Nadav, and Avihu, and 70 from the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet was as a form of whitened brickwork sapphire, and it was as the essence of the skies for purity. And unto the noble of the sons of Israel he did not send his hand, and they envisioned God, and they ate and they drank. And Yehovah spoke unto Moshe, ascend unto me toward the mountain, and exist there, and I will bestow for you the stone tablets, and the teaching, the Torah, and the commandment that I have written for teaching to them. So they saw a vision of God, and he did not send his hand to destroy them, because he is being God before them. And of course, they didn't see God, they saw a vision of God. But this is when the big twist happens, and it's quite surprising, actually, at this moment. So they already saw the vision of God. Moshe is ascending up onto the mountain to get the stone tablets from God directly. And this is when the people of Israel decide to make the golden calf. And they literally just said that they're not going to make any other gods before Yehovah. And then they go and they do that. And God's pretty upset. He's actually ready to just completely destroy them. And Moshe has to step in and kind of intercede for them. And he reminds God of his pact that he made with Abraham. And that the covenant will be passed on to Abraham's descendants. And of course, God has to honor his covenant with Abraham. So he does spare the people at this time. But that's when we see some changes. Because up until this time, the only sacrifices that we've seen were conciliation offerings or peace offerings and ascension offerings, which are for worship. And not the point of all sacrifices is not just for remission of sins or to be a transgression offering. I'll do another sermon on offerings and sacrifices later. But at this point, God's listened to Moshe, and now he's going to give them the instructions on how to do a transgression offering and an atonement sacrifice, a covering. Atonement means to cover them, because at this point they really need it. And guess what? If you go and make other gods before Yehovah, you're also going to be in some desperate need of an atonement sacrifice or an atonement offering. Now, they already negated the covenant by their actions. But God's looking for a way to keep it going, to continue to honor the pact that he made with Abraham. So I already mentioned that he gives them the sacrificial requirements for the transgression offering and the atonement sacrifice. And he also cuts out a secondary pact or a tertiary pact. If you remember, the first pact was with Noah, and you can read about that in Deuteronomy 29 and 30. And it's basically a warning not to continue to mess up and to disobey God. But it also states that the covenant is now, it's with everyone that was there, able to be present, but also with everyone who was not able to be present there at that time, which is quite a notable endorsement, if you will, to the covenant. And you remember that they were also there with a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt. So there were probably some Egyptians or other foreigners with them as well. And the covenant is now extended to all of them as Israel. So then later, God actually makes a covenant with David, with King David. And it's based upon the premise of the covenant with Abraham. So we could call this covenant 3.5. If you will. So you've got the first covenant with Noah, you have the covenant with Abraham, and then there's another covenant that's been made after that was aside from the covenant at Horeb, at Sinai. And out of all of these covenants, which one is the old covenant? The scriptures, they don't actually mention any specific old covenant or Old Testament. These are all promises of God, and they do all stand. The covenants are based on promises. And what we see are efforts of God to keep these promises and these covenants going, because he is faithful, and he's faithful to Abraham, his servant, and to all of those who join themselves to Yehovah. But the scriptures do actually mention a renewed covenant, one that's going to come as he's going to renew his promises with the promised seed of Abraham. Behold, days are coming, says Yehovah, and I will cut out with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah a renewed pact. Not as the pact that I had cut out with their fathers on the day I gripped them by the hand for causing them to emerge from the land of Mitzrayim, that which those negated my pact, and I was a master by them, says Yehovah. As this is the pact that I will cut out with the house of Israel after those days, says Yehovah. I will bestow my teaching, my Torah, into their midst, and over their heart will I write it. And I will exist before them for God, and those will exist for me for a people. And a man will not furthermore instruct his companion and a man his brother for speaking, Know Yehovah, as all of them will know me. For from the littlest until greatest, says Yehovah, as I will forgive their injustice, and for their transgression I will not remember furthermore. So the pact that they negated, a pact to be God before them, which pact is he talking about? He's saying he's not going to remember their transgression anymore for transgressing the pact, right? He's talking about the covenant, the pact that he made with Abraham. And Yisrael had been split up. It was split into two kingdoms, Yisrael and Yehuda. And then Yisrael was completely cut off and scattered into the nations because of their transgressions. So in order to fulfill the promise, God has to bring Yisrael back. And he has to bring Yisrael and Yehuda back together to make one nation, the seed of Abraham, so that he can renew his pact. That was the prophecy and that was the promise. And declare unto them, So spoke my Lord Yehovah, Behold, I will take the sons of Israel from between the nations, that of which they have gone there, and I will amass them from around, and I will bring them unto their land. And I will form them for one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. And one king will exist for all of them for a king, and it will not exist furthermore for two nations, and they will not be divided furthermore for two kingdoms evermore. And they will not defile themselves furthermore by their totems and by their detestable things and by any of their trespasses. And I will save them from all their settlements, that which they have transgressed in them. And I will purify them, and they will exist before me for a people. And I will exist for God before them. And my servant David will be king over them. And one shepherd will exist for all of them. And they will go by my judgments, and they will guard my ordinances, and they will perform them. And they will settle over upon the land that I bestowed for my servant Yaakov, that which your fathers settled in it. And they will settle over it, those and their sons and the sons of their sons, until antiquity. And David my servant will be prince for them until antiquity. And I will cut out for them a pact of reconciliation. It will exist, a pact to antiquity with them, and I will bestow to them, and I will cause them to be abundant. And I will bestow my sanctuary in the middle of them for antiquity, and my dwelling will exist over upon them, and I will exist for God before them, and those will exist before me for a people. And the Gentile nations will know as I, Yehovah, am sanctifying Israel by the existence of my sanctuary in the middle of them for antiquity. Now, if you learned anything from this sermon, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel, or leave any comments if there's anything that you disagree with or have further questions about. I would love to do more studying or bring more scriptures to the table for anyone who has any further interest. Please let me know. Also, see my sermon on Yeshua and the Passover to see how Yeshua fulfills the Passover and how that's related to the covenant of God. And of course, the Passover was the night that God is bringing the sons of Israel out of Egypt to make them into a nation for himself, for them to be a people for him and for him to be God before them. Thank you and shalom.